Hi folks, David Petersen here. I'm going to be doing a coloring demonstration on this Ladybug illustration that I've done. I've had some questions about coloring, and I thought I'd make it really basic with this very simple one character kind of sample illustration. So I've got my drawing scanned in. I did it in grayscale, and I've pasted it into an RGB file. I have the inks on their own separate layer. They're labeled as inks. And then this is one of the important tricks. This is the first step when you're coloring, is you set your inks layer to multiply. There's a drop-down menu on the layer menu. It's usually set to normal, which means that all the white are white pixels, all the black are black pixels, and everything's a solid pixel. If you set this to multiply, what that tells the computer is that anything that's black should be treated as opaque, and anything that's white should be treated like a transparency. The way I'm going to be able to show you this working is I'm going to draw on a new layer that I've placed underneath inks. And you can see that wherever I drew the red, or when I drew the red, on the white it shows up, and on the black it doesn't. So that's what it looks like on its own layer. If I put this on top, you can see, red would go right over top, just like you were, painting an X over something. But when I put it behind, it treats all the white like transparency on the inks layer. Now my color layer is, with the X, is set to normal. And that's how all of the layers underneath this will be treated. All the layers of color will be treated. I'm going to delete away the X, not delete the layer, just clear out what I've drawn onto it. And I'm going to rename this layer Ladybug Red, just to make life easy. Now in coloring, you want to establish different areas. I'm going to make sure that the Ladybug Red is different than the blade of grass, which is different than the sky, etc. And this process is called flatting. I tend to do it on separate layers. There are people who do it all on one layer. There are people who do it through channels instead of layers. This is the way I feel most comfortable, so this is the way I'm going to demonstrate. So on my layer called Ladybug Red, which is set to normal, one layer underneath inks, I'm going to start painting in the ladybug. Now, you noticed I got a little sloppy there and I went over a few edges. No problem. I can just zoom in a little bit and erase things away with just a hard-edged eraser. I'm using the pencil tool to do my fill too, so that the to fill in all the red, so that the edges are hard. Okay, so the Ladybug Red is now in. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to call this Sky. I'm going to drag it beneath Ladybug Red. Let's choose some kind of innocuous bright blue. And I'm just going to fill the whole thing. Now this goes all the way to the edges, obviously, out beyond my border. I could go in and very carefully erase along this line, but because I have a nice solid line here, I can use the Magic Wand tool. Now the Magic Wand tool detects borders, detects where pixels are different from one another. You have to have certain checkboxes selected. The tolerance is how close to the color that you're wanding it will select. I have it set fairly high at 80, and I have contiguous checked and sample all layers checked. And then when I click in this margin, it detects the edge of my border, even though that's on a separate layer, and that's because I have the sample all layers. If I didn't, it would just select everything. But with sample all layers checked, it'll detect that I'm only talking about what's outside of that border. And then I hit delete and it clears it away. I'm going to make another layer called Grass. fill that in. Now, I obviously went way over the edges. There's a couple easy ways to clean this up. I can do it the same way using the magic wand and get rid of that area and get rid of this area. I can also, well, I'll just stick with that. You know what? We'll keep this simple and light. We'll just go with that. There we go. So now the only thing we need are some of the little details on the ladybug. I'll make one more layer. I'll put it above grass. And I'll call it Ladybug White. I'm going to not actually pick something that's absolute white. I'm going to pick a really light yellow, pale, buffy kind of color. And I'm going to get in here and I'm going to paint everything that is the ladybug, but that shouldn't be grass color. So that's the joints between the sections of the head. That's the white dots. That's the shading on the kind of hard carapace. It'll be the antennas here, even though these are going to have some slight differentiations in color when I'm done. I'm going to put them all on the same layer using the same color for now, just because they're teeny tiny little details. Then I'll do the joints in between the legs that way too. Okay, now this super simple piece is flatted. Just to review, on the very top layer we have the inks set to multiply. Now if I set the inks back to normal, everything goes back the same. I actually erased a little bit of, if I turn that off, there we go. I'll turn off everything, the background and everything. You can see the checkerboard, the Photoshop checkerboard, which indicates transparency. If I turn that on, I had a little smudge up in my inks thing, a little dust that was on the scanner, and I erased it out. And instead of painting it white, I just erased it, so there's a little transparent thing there, which is why that showed up when I turned the sky layer on. But if I set this back to multiply, and then I slowly turn on the layers, you'll see there's the sky, then the grass, then the ladybug white, and then the ladybug red. Couple reasons I do things on multiple layers like this. One, it's easy when you're painting, when you're filling this in. If I had already filled in the grass and then I was painting in the red and I accidentally bumped over into the green and I needed to erase it, I can't just erase. I have to get the green back and paint the green back in. This way I can just erase and it just shows what's on the layer behind it. The other reason is I can very quickly go back and forth between these layers as I'm wanting to select things and make alterations during the coloring process. And I find that way easier than having it all flat on one layer. So now we're going to get into the rendering process. I tend to only use two tools, and on the toolbar they are in this position. It's the dodge tool and the burn tool. Now these two are used, they're photographic based tools. And all you really need to know is that dodge means to lighten and burn means to darken. I'm going to start with the burn tool, and when I right click up to get my brush menu, this is just a standard Photoshop 7 brush that I tend to use. It's called dry brush if you really dig in there and find out the name of it. It's towards the bottom. It has a preset of a diameter of 39. I always crank that way up. That's kind of what it looks like when you use it. It's got little dots and spattery bits. And then with this on the lowest settings, here are the settings up here, I have it on exposure of 1. I can also select what I want it to affect. Shadows, midtones, or highlights. But in addition to what it affects, it also kind of determines how it affects colors. So I'm going to be using the burn, which means to darken. If I eyedropper up this sky color, to get to a black or a white, it has to take some kind of a path. It can go direct, diagonal line from here to white, like that, or it could kind of go up and around and over, To get to black, it could go this way and down. It could go this way and down. It could go over to gray and then down. So when you have it selected to highlights and you're burning, it tends to desaturate as it darkens. So it takes this path. When you have it set to midtones, it takes a little bit more of a direct path like this, and when you have it set to shadows, it saturates as it darkens. It takes that kind of a curve. I want it to be desaturating as it darkens because I don't want oversaturated colors. So I have it set to highlights. I have the exposure turned to the lowest possible setting, and then I just click and move around. Now, even on this lowest setting, it tends to work a little too much for my tastes. So I say edit and I fade back the effects. It's kind of like a half undo. And then I slowly build that up. Edit, fade. That way I can get some of that subtle modeling. I can go back in, I can do now I'll do the highlights. I want to lighten areas, and I'll use the dodge tool. I'm going to right click, get the right brush coming up here, which is the exact same one, that 39. Bump up the size to about what I want. And then same thing with the range here, except with the range in dodge, it's the opposite of burn. So when you have it set to highlights, it saturates as it highlights, as opposed to desaturating as it highlights. The reason I use it on highlight is things get a little too washed out and go gray if you have it set to mid-tones or something like that. So I like it getting a little bit of vibrancy. Whoa, I have the undo. I have the exposure set too high. I have this also set on the lowest setting, which is 1. I might even go a little bigger here. I can fade that back out. If I don't like the overall color here, I can get into the color balance, and using these slider bars, I can make changes and select what I'm affecting the most, the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights. And get the color in a place where I'm a little happier with it. I think that's a little bit better. I might also brighten it a touch and lower the contrast. I know that's a lot of noodling around, but that's how I get some of the more subtle color effects when I'm doing mouse guard. I will color the grass next. I tend, when I'm doing a more complex scene, I tend to render the background first and then the characters. And I guess I'm kind of doing that here now. I rendered the sky, and then I'm going to render the blade of grass. But you don't have to. That's just the order I tend to work. I don't know that there's any benefit to it. So I'm going in again with the burn tool. Just kind of moving around. Some of that's just to give it texture. I can fade it back. I'll put a little bit of a shadow, that the ladybug is sitting there. Fade that back a bit. I'll go in with the dodge tool. Same kind of thing, just wiggling over, sometimes just to make texture, sometimes to actually get the values where I want them. Fade it back a touch. Then I can go in and make my brush really small, turn up the exposure a bit, and run a few lines like this to make the grooves on the blade of grass a little bit more three-dimensional, a little bit more textured. I'm doing this with a mouse. I probably would be better served doing this kind of work with a Wacom tablet or some kind of a stylus. But because I tend not to do a lot of this, and it's rather imprecise work anyhow, I just keep using the mouse the way I always have been. And these are subtle. I'm fading them back out. They're not getting major major attention as graphic design elements, you know. Because I do a more painterly style of color rather than a hard-edged, kind of drawn-in or markered-in coloring technique. I think the mouse actually helps. It helps me not be so focused. I think it would look like I was using little color pencils doing drawing, almost drawing in color if I used a stylus. For me. All right, I'll fade that back out. Now I did that all in one click. I never lifted my finger off the button. Dial that back a bit. I'll do one little thing on this little tick mark here, one on this tick mark. Now you see I'm still doing the same click. People have asked in the past, how come I'm not affecting the area in between? This brush tends to work the best when you wiggle. So if you're just quickly moving from one area to another, it doesn't affect the places in between, just where you kind of end up and wiggle. And that's just something about this brush. And it's a stock brush in Photoshop. Dial that back a bit. Okay, now I'm going to adjust the color like I did on the sky. This is a little saturated for me and a little too Crayola green, a little too out of the box green. And sometimes I don't know what I want color-wise until I've played with these sliders enough. That looks about right. I'm going to come back in and do one more thing for the shadow. Now for the, I'll select the Ladybug red. Start again with the burn tool. Give it some overall texture and then focus on shading this lower edge. Made that really dark, didn't I? Come back in with the dodge. Whew. Oh, I have the dodge set too high. That's why. I was wondering why it came out so strong. I'm going to step back. I'm going back to when I was burning. I'm actually going to step one more back from when I was burning because I think I went too far. I'll just start all over with the Ladybug red. So back with the burning, because I think I went a little too far when I did this. And I need to be on the right layer. There we go. Give some texture, give a little bit of a shadow down here. Then come in with the dodge tool, set to the right thing with a low exposure. There we go, that's a little better. Now with some colors, the dodge tool set to highlights gets some interesting color choices. Now you see this is going yellow, orange and yellow as it's lightning. Sometimes that's a desired effect, sometimes it isn't. And the way that you affect it is changing the range up here so that it's affecting what you want it to affect. So if I select midtones, it'll start desaturating as it lightens, and so I'll actually get a nice white muted highlight eventually there. I'm just wiggling over the areas that need to be affected using this brush, dodge and burn tools. Giving it some texture as I go, and then maybe making some tweaks with the color balance. So that's more in the mouse guard palette. Also going to adjust the levels because that got a little too dark there. There we go. And then on Ladybug White, my last layer to work on, I'm going to start again with the burn. For the little cricks in the leg, the little joints, and the carapace, I don't mind going dark. So I'm going to select, using the magic wand, these parts that I want to be white. And I'm going to select, go to the select menu, hit inverse, and now I'm only dealing with the antenna and the carapace, shell parts. And I can do that kind of stuff and make it go a little bit more brown. Does it work better? Kind of. You know what? It works a little better if it's like a steel gray, like a gunmetal gray. So I'll do that. Give that little highlight a little bit more of a highlight. And the little antennas all highlight. Now instead of just trying to reselect the white areas, I can say select inverse again, and I'm back to those white areas. If the outline, if the moving outline, sometimes called marching ants, distracts you, Command or Control H makes them go away, and doing it again brings them back. They're not away. It makes them disappear, I guess is really it hides them. But you're still only selected on those areas. Fade that back. And get the color balance a little bit more warm. And there you have it. A very simple coloring demonstration on my technique for using dodge and burn and then multiple layers for coloring line art that is set to multiply.